The Palestine Papers, an Al Jazeera investigation. The trouble with Obama, how a fresh start put the peace process back to square one. Swapping their citizens, the people that Israel wanted to trade for a Jewish state. And the papers reveal no voice and no right of return for millions of Palestinian refugees. Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Al Jazeera's second release of the Palestine Papers, the largest leak of confidential documents in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Once again, these are diplomatic discussions that the public was never meant to hear. Now, on this program, 3 sets of evidence. 1. The papers show a deal was in the works that would have seen only a fraction of the 6 million Palestinian refugees worldwide return to their homeland. 2. That the United States was a difficult partner in peace talks, at least from the Palestinian perspective. And 3, Israel was prepared to barter thousands of its citizens for more land and in the name of a Jewish state. Barnaby Phillips discovered the human price that the Israelis were prepared to pay.
They are Arabs, yet they are part of Israel, forever torn between nationality and identity. And to some Israelis, they are a threat to a cherished objective, a true Jewish state. Now we know that Israeli officials at the highest level suggested redesigning their country's borders to exclude some Arab populations in return for key Jewish settlements.
Does swap mean also the swap of inhabitants? I know this is a problem for you.
We'll never accept any change in the reality of the life of the Arabs living in Israel or their transfer. They're Israeli citizens.
You didn't accept the annexations of settlement blocks, and we never accepted 1967 borders. Therefore, let's look at the maps.
And a few months later, the Israelis mention specific villages.
Barka, Barta il Sharkieh, Barta il Garbia, Betil, Beit Safafa.
This will be difficult. All Arabs in Israel will be against us.
We will need to address it somehow. Divide it. All Palestinian, all Israeli.
I'm in a place called Baka, an Arab village inside Israel, one of those mentioned in that very conversation. And as those Palestinian negotiators suspected, people here are very nervous of any suggestion that borders be redrawn and that the status of this place changes.
We are loyal to Israel as a country with all the rights and state and so on. But on the other hand, we are loyal to our traditions and history and background. I believe that we are very interesting people in the world, that we are loyal for 2 dimensions in the same time. It's very difficult, but this is the fact.
However, Israeli negotiators saw the two-state solution as an opportunity to create a more Jewish Israel.
Each state constituting the homeland for its people and the fulfillment of their national aspirations and self-determination in their own territory. Israel, the state of the Jewish people, and I would like to emphasize the meaning of its people is the Jewish people.
In these Arab villages, they've always felt that contradiction between Israel's democratic values and its desire to be a Jewish state. But now, new evidence of how their government tried to sign away their citizenship. Barnaby Phillips, Baka al-Gharbia, Israel.
Well, joining us now to discuss what we've just seen and heard in Barnaby's report is Shlomo Ben-Ami, the former Israeli foreign minister. Thanks once again for being with us. What we've seen in the papers here, what's being proposed is a redrawing of the borders to exclude Israel's Arab citizens in order to become an ethnically pure state. Is that how you see it?
Well, that's a bit overdoing it. I think that what Livni says in this, according to these reports, is that she would like the Palestinians to consider that in the context of the territorial swaps, some of the villages that are divided by the Green Line She's not speaking like, say, Lieberman about a sweeping transfer of populations. She's speaking about very concrete villages such as Bak al-Gharbia and Bak al-Sharqiya or Bet Safafa and others that are split by the Green Line. So she asked whether they would consider that this would be part of the swaps.
How does this idea play with the Israeli people? Would they find what's said in these meetings, as we heard it there, would they find that sort of talk repugnant?
Not necessarily, not necessarily. I think that obviously there is a segment of the population that will see that as repugnant, but I guess that you will find some echo, some positive echo against, in some important segments of the population, because in recent years we have seen a deterioration in the relations between Jews and Arabs, and the emergence of Lieberman, obviously, and all kind of legislation that is being passed in the Knesset now is not necessarily or is not exactly conducive to improve these kind of relations.
Tzipi Livni says herself, according to the papers, Israel, the state of the Jewish people, and I'd like to emphasize the meaning of its people, the Jewish people. Does Israel not consider then its Arab citizens its people?
Well, no, it doesn't consider them its people, but it considers them, or it should consider them its citizens. There is a line that needs to be drawn here. This is the Jewish people, and they belong to the Palestinian people. In fact, the dilemma, the Palestinian tragedy in Israel, is that they will say that their state is at war with their people. So I think this distinction is common in Israel, not only among the Arabs. The Jews also understand that.
And one final question. From what you've seen in the papers on this issue, is it being discussed any differently today from when you were involved in the negotiations?
Oh yes, I think that the ambiance is different, the atmosphere, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times is different. When we were in office, we did not at any point in the negotiations raise the possibility of changing the border in a way that would include in the Palestinian state Arab villages. It did not cross our minds. It was very clear that we need to look for swaps, not on an ethnic basis. That was our position.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's take a moment now to tell you a little more about what we call Palestinian Israelis. Now, as Israel expanded through the 1948 and 1967 wars, many Palestinians found themselves under its control and became Israeli citizens. Now, today, they number some 1.5 million people, roughly 20% of Israel's population. Israel's 1948 Declaration of Independence granted, quote, complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. But human rights activists say that many Palestinian Israelis suffer from social discrimination and prejudice. Well, joining us now to discuss these latest revelations in the Palestine papers are Rami Khouri, director of the Issam Fares Institute of Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut, and Ali Abunimah, co-founder of the Electronic Intifada. Ali, do you agree with what Shlomo Ben Ami was saying there, that Livni in the papers isn't speaking like Lieberman, because that's not quite how I read them?
No, I don't agree with Shlomo Ben Ami at all. When you look at the papers in their totality, as people will have the chance to do as they're rolled out, you see that a persistent theme of Tzipi Livni and Israeli negotiators in general. It says in one of the summaries of the negotiations written by the Palestinians that the Palestinian negotiators kept raising the issue of land swaps, including Palestinian citizens of Israel, so that the goal of the Israelis appears to be increasingly to get rid of Palestinian citizens of Israel, to dump them into a sort of Palestinian Bantustan, to assure the purity of Israel as a so-called Jewish state. And what ties into that, as I think we'll see, is both the Israeli endorsement and the American endorsement, and I've written about this tonight on Al-Jazeera.net, to endorse the 1967 line as the border. And I think that opens the door to this critically dangerous idea of population exchange.
We're going to talk a little more later in the programme about the 1967 line. But Rami, first of all, I want to read you directly from something from the papers here. Now, on November 13th, 2007, Saib Erekat said, "We've never denied Israel's right to define itself. If you want to call yourself the Jewish state of Israel, you can call it what you want." Now, what would Palestinians think of what he's saying there?
Well, the central reality of modern Palestinianhood is refugeehood. It is the great calamity of the Palestinian people starting in 47. Before the 1948 war, you had ethnic cleansing by pre-state Zionist militant groups and terrorist groups. Refugeehood is absolutely the central issue for the Palestinians, and it must be resolved if this conflict is to be resolved. The counterpoint to Palestinian rights is exclusive Jewish statehood, which is Zionism. The Israelis have a state, and Zionism is about a state for the Jewish people. This group of leaders in Israel is more explicit about this than previous groups were. So there's going to be great opposition to and suspicion about this notion of a Jewish state, and it's troubling that the Obama people have started to use the phrase, not exactly the same way as Netanyahu and Lieberman, but getting close. So the refugeehood has to be resolved if a majority Jewish state, an Israeli state whose majority of whose citizens, like now, are Jewish, is to ever be part of a peace agreement that is fair to both people.
And how do you think Arab Israelis would feel about PA negotiators negotiating in such a way without consulting them that if any deal was reached, they would automatically find themselves becoming Palestinian Palestinian citizens?
What's interesting here is if you look through these documents as we have, and you read through them all, and this is a record that is maybe not 100% of everything that's been going on between these two parties, but it seems pretty complete. The Israelis don't ever talk about Palestinian rights. They talk about Palestinian aspirations. They talk about Palestinian dreams. They talk about Palestinian self-determination in their own territory, meaning the West Bank and Gaza. So the delegitimization of the concept of Palestinian rights is central to Zionism and the modern state of Israel. It happens with refugeehood outside of Palestine, and it happens with second-class citizenship in Palestine, and it may now go to a third level, which is getting rid of some Palestinian Israelis, citizens who are in Israel, like my own family who live in Nazareth.
If I can just point out one thing that I think is important, to be fair to the Palestinian negotiators, they don't at any point, as far as the records indicate, agree with the Israeli ideas to exchange population. In fact, they object to it. You could argue about whether they object to it strenuously enough. I think the thing that's more dangerous is the Israelis pushing the idea and the possibility that we need to look at of eventually the Americans coming to accept it.
And we will talk about the Americans later in the programme. For the moment, gentlemen, thank you. Rami, you touched upon the issue of refugees. Well, let's move on to the next part of the release of the Palestine Papers, the details of negotiations on Palestinian refugees. Now, this goes to the very heart of the right of return, one of the core issues. Let's take you through it. There are about 6 million Palestinians worldwide with a claim to the right of return, refugees and their descendants from the 1948 and 1967 wars. UN Resolution 194 in 1948 resolves that refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbours should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date. Now, the resolution isn't binding, but it's been affirmed by the United Nations every year since, a case unprecedented in UN history. Well, the Palestine Papers back up what the Israelis have always said on this issue, that they will not take the refugees back. But the documents also expose the concessions that the Palestinian leadership is prepared to make. Barnaby Phillips reports.
The Palestinian camps in Lebanon are full of old faces and fading dreams. Some cling to memories and images of resistance. But for most, this is all they've known. Second-class citizens in Lebanon who struggle to find work and keep faith in the future. For Palestinians, Israel's birth will always be stained by original sin. Hundreds of thousands were driven from their homes This was a vast, complex tragedy. But for successive Israeli governments, it's simple. Palestinian refugees are not their problem.
As for the refugees, frankly, the Israeli position is that the creation of a Palestinian state is the answer to the refugee issue. I know that you don't accept this at the present time. Your state will be the answer to all Palestinians, including refugees. Putting an end to claims means fulfilling national rights for all.
In fact, the confidential papers seen by Al Jazeera offer very little comfort to people living in refugee camps like this one. They show that in 2008, Israel was only prepared to accept a token return of just a few thousand Palestinian refugees from the entire diaspora. But they also show how the Palestinian leadership, for its part, was prepared to make major concessions on behalf of the Palestinian refugee community.
Palestinians will need to know that 5 million refugees will not go back. The number will be agreed as one of the options. Also, the number returning to their own state will depend on annual absorption capacity.
And refugees would be excluded from a promise referendum on a peace deal. These are the minutes of a meeting between Saeb Erekat and the Belgian foreign minister in 2007.
I never said the diaspora will vote. It's not going to happen. The referendum will be for Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank and Jerusalem. Can't do it in Lebanon, can't do it in Jordan.
Our papers show Israel pushing the refugee problem more and more in the direction of an unenthused United States.
If the U.S. is going to have a major role, we have a problem with funding the states for refugees. Jordan, now we are paying for some of the Iraqi refugees. Through helping to cover, maybe we will be able to find countries that can contribute. Chile, Argentina.
So, who will stand up for the refugees, clinging to a notional right of return that nobody in power appears to believe in? The waiting here is not only tragic, it is surely futile. Barnaby Phillips in Shatila refugee camp, Beirut.
Well, let's put some of the issues raised in that film to our panel of experts, Rami Khouri and Ali Abu Nima. Ali, were Palestinian negotiators ever serious about this issue of refugees, do you think? Were refugees anything other than a bargaining chip?
No, and that's the shocking thing, I think, for Palestinians, is the number of times Arafat talks about the refugees as a bargaining chip. The three things that stood out for me from this very quickly. One, the Palestinian Authority position was 15,000 refugees a year for 10 years returning to Israel. So basically a total of 150,000, which means they'd already thrown out of the window the rights of 5 or 6 million Palestinian refugees. And they were only haggling with Israel over the difference between Israel's offer of 5,000 and their starting position of 150,000. That's one. The second point is, the Palestinian leadership telling the Palestinian people in public, we will never give up the right of return, and you will have a say. There will be a referendum. And Saeb Erekat telling the Belgian Foreign Minister, Karel de Gucht, on 23rd of March 2007, there will be no referendum for Palestinians in the diaspora. That is an incredibly shocking betrayal.
Absolutely. Rami, it stands in stark contrast to previous assertions by the Palestinian negotiators that people would have a say. How do you think the people in the diaspora will react to that?
Well, they're going to react very badly, and they're going to want to have more clarity from the Palestinian political leadership. The problem is that this current Palestinian leadership, in the PA mostly, has become largely divorced from the whole Palestinian diaspora, people all over the Middle East and the world, and especially the camps. When I go to the camps in Lebanon where I live, and you see this with the people, there's a sense that they have to take care of themselves. They're clinging to some hope that something will happen in the future, but there's a real problem of credibility between the Palestinian leadership and the refugees on this issue. There's no consultation, and the leadership is negotiating, the Palestinians are negotiating without having this support from their own people, which makes them in a much weaker position.
But hang on, there's an elephant in the room here. Is it truly realistic to expect all of those people to be repatriated?
It's realistic to expect that the rights of the rights of the refugees will be recognized, that Israel will acknowledge its responsibility for a major share of the refugeehood. A negotiated agreement according to the Arab peace plan to be agreed by both sides will be achieved that gives the Palestinians acknowledgement of their rights and options. Whether 4 million or 2 million or 20,000 go back is to be negotiated by the parties.
Now, we talked with Condoleezza Rice made an appearance, her first appearance in the papers there. She took the view that the refugee crisis is the responsibility of the international community and not Israel. And if you read through the papers, the US extended a lot of pressure on Palestinian negotiators on this particular issue. How do you think that the US role in all of this affects how this core issue has actually been negotiated?
Let's remember something. Helen Thomas was vilified and excoriated because she suggested that Israelis should go back to Poland. Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State of the United States, was suggesting that Palestinian refugees be sent to Chile and Argentina. What's the difference? Are Palestinian refugees somehow less human than Israelis? And remember, Palestinian refugees are the original people of the land. Your question about whether it's realistic, well, Israel is telling us that they would like 1 million more Jews to move to Israel. So it's not a question of space or land. We know that the space and the land is there. It's the question that as far as Israel is concerned, Palestinian refugees are the wrong type of person. Israel is a state that privileges people based on ethno-religious criteria. So yes, it's realistic for refugees to return if we see all human beings as equal. It's pragmatic, it's realistic, it can be done.
We're talking about the diaspora. We're going to take you live now on Al Jazeera to Beirut, and our correspondent Zaina Khodda. And Zaina, you're with some of the very people, or you've been talking to some of the very people that we've been discussing here.
Exactly, someone who is directly affected, a Palestinian refugee living in Lebanon, Tariq. Tariq, what is your reaction that Palestinian officials are ready to accept that only a token number of refugees will ever be given the right to return home?
Well, the documents just released by Al Jazeera, they really don't reveal anything new. We've known the Palestinian Authority, what they've been doing for the past 18 years, is only giving up ridiculous concessions to the Israeli occupation. They've been cooperating by imprisoning resistance leaders, and they've been benefiting financially from the construction of the wall and the continuation of the occupation. The documents, they only prove what we've known, and I think we should take into consideration when we look at the documents what is really going on in Palestine with the Palestinian Authority. They've effectively turned into a puppet regime for the Israeli occupation. And I mean, the negotiations and the concessions are just a manifestation of
What
this.
about a referendum on a future Palestinian-Israeli agreement? The diaspora will not have a say in this. You won't have the right to vote.
Well, ever since Oslo, the PA leadership has been isolating the Palestinians of the diaspora from the struggle because they are really the essence of the issue. I mean, the Nakba is the essence of the Palestinian issue, and the people affected by the Nakba are the refugees. So, I mean,
But what question? We have Nabil Shah sitting in our studio, a senior PLO official. What question do you have for him?
Honestly, my question, I'd address this question to the Palestinian Authority, not just to Nabil Shah himself. The Palestinian Authority, I mean, we've all realized that the negotiations are leading nowhere, and that the only strategy is resistance in all its forms, both pacific and...
The question?
My question to Nabil Shah would be when he and his crew will pack up their things and leave Palestine and let the Palestinians liberate their land.
as you said, Nabil Shah, the senior PLO official, is with us here in the studio. Mr. Shah, thanks for being with us. Let's deal with what that gentleman that Zainab was speaking to there. He's quite angry. He says, when is the Palestinian Authority going to pack up and let the Palestinians determine their own future?
Well, the Palestinians gained a lot when there was a leadership for them called the PLO that was recognized the world as representing them. I mean, a people without a representation is a people that goes nowhere. And I think it's when the world recognized the Palestinian leadership is when we started making progress. We moved from a refugee issue to the issue of a people with a land, with rights, with self-determination and the right to a state.
But the PA has lost its legitimacy, hasn't it? I mean, as that gentleman says, he accuses you of being a puppet regime for the Israeli occupation.
Well, I understand and I forgive him. I think he really misses the point totally. I mean, during these years in the occupied territory, we were able to bring in 250,000 Palestinian refugees inside the West Bank and Gaza, which was a reversal of a 20-year-old deportation every year and transfer of Palestinians every year. We were able to create a personality for the Palestinian that was recognized in the world. We are pushing that today to be an independent state that the world is recognizing. It's true what he said. I've heard his last statements that today negotiations looked futile with Mr. Netanyahu. It is futile, and that is why we are out of negotiations. We are out of negotiations into non-violent popular struggle, into international actions such as the anti-apartheid action of the South Africans. We are into trying to regain our national unity and into building institutions for the state that will come. And this is a strategy that starts from the recognition that today negotiations are going nowhere.
I want to ask you about the Palestine papers. The PA has been very critical today of Al Jazeera since our first broadcast 24 hours ago. Have you had an opportunity to look at the Palestine papers on our website? Do you share the belief that they're a fabrication, or as Saib Erekat today has been saying that the documents were linked to my office? He says he appears to be coming around to the view that they are perhaps genuine. We'll have an investigation, he says, into what happened, and I will be subject to the force of law, the legal process himself. Do you accept that they're genuine?
Well, they probably are. The question is not really is how do you read them. First of all, of all these papers, only 3 were papers that officially were submitted to the Israelis. These are called on top non-papers, and they had the motto, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, non-binding papers. And therefore, all the papers that we have submitted the Israelis out of all of this 16,000 page mess are really 3 papers, 1 on territory, 1 on Jerusalem, and 1 on refugees. And these are non-papers, and the statement is that they are non-binding and that unless everything is agreed, nothing is agreed, number 1. Number 2...
But have you read them yourself? You say they're probably genuine. What do you mean by probably?
Well, what I heard yesterday, what I have seen on Al Jazeera, these are statements that looked like, I mean, I don't know, I have not seen them in front of me. They looked like they are genuine. The question, they were read out of context, they were read out of the proviso that I've just said.
Well, we'll put them into context for us. If they're out of context, well, I mean, people can go on and...
I'll give you 2 examples. There's one statement yesterday that proclaimed that Mr. Erekat said, I'll do anything, but I will never become a Zionist. Well, this was really, if the paper, I recall the paper in which this was mentioned, this was in response to the question, would you recognize Israel as a Jewish state? And he said, no, I will never do, because I will never be a Zionist. But that was not mentioned in the paper yesterday. Another one, there was a statement that Ms. Livni said to Mr. Erekat or to Mr. Qrea, I do not want to discuss Jerusalem. Cut, as if this was the statement. But Ms. Livni went on discussing Jerusalem for months. And therefore, this is what I mean out of context. And secondly, out of the proper assessment of what these papers are. They are non-papers and they are non-binding, and they do not form the body of an agreement until there is a full agreement reached. We have not reached the agreement, neither in Camp David, nor in Taba, nor in Annapolis, nor in these negotiations with Ms. Livni and Mr. Olmert. None, and in fact, we are today out of these negotiations, saying that if Israel did not implement what was first done in the interim agreements, how can we trust that Israel will ever be able to implement or willing to implement a new final permanent status agreement?
I just want to bring you back to you were talking about something being out of context there, and you were quoting from what you'd heard on Al Jazeera yesterday. This is the actual quote. Saeb Barakat says, "We've never denied Israel's right to define itself. If you want to call yourself the Jewish state of Israel, you can call it what you want."
Yeah,
that's taken from the actual
but there
documents.
was another paper yesterday that was presented after that, and obviously there is a disconnect between these two statements, in which he said, "I will never be a Zionist." This is in response to what? This is in response to a question about recognizing Israel as a Jewish state. Israel can call itself what it wants, that's what he said, but we will not recognize that statement about Israel, because it jeopardizes our people in Israel, the Palestinians in Israel, and it jeopardizes the right of our refugees. It's very simple.
24 hours ago, we found it very difficult to get any comment at all from the PA. We had Saeb Barakat speaking on our Arabic sister network. He was very, very angry at the time, and then nothing. No one wanted to say anything. There was complete denial, it seems. Today you're here. Is this a damage limitation exercise?
No, I am really trying to respond to what had happened. What had happened is, for 10 years, now we're going into the 11th year, we have been discussing permanent status negotiations, and we got nowhere because of Israeli intransigence. We have committed ourselves to nothing except our very clear principles. On land, it will be the land of 1967 occupied in the West Bank and Gaza. It was clearly in the papers that you presented in your Arabic version that this includes the Dead Sea, the no-fire zone, Gaza, Jerusalem. It includes all of those. And it's very clear that if we are going to make very limited swaps, it's going to be one-to-one, and that these swaps have conditions upon them, and that refugees have a right to return and to be compensated, and no figures were ever really discussed or agreed with the Israelis.
It's clear that the Palestine Papers, the release of the Palestine Papers has triggered a lot of anger among not just Palestinians, but people who care passionately about the well-being of people in the region right around the world. What do you think the long-term impact will be on the Palestinian Authority? Is the PA the right body to be negotiating on behalf of Palestinians wherever they may be?
There is no other body. This is the body that the Palestinian people have chosen. Every negotiating experience...
But does it have a legitimacy anymore?
They do. I mean, if the question about delayed elections because of the separation we have between here and Gaza does not negate the legitimacy of the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people. Every negotiating experience really had to go to the Palestine National Congress, the Madrid negotiating, the Vienna, the Oslo negotiations, the Wye River negotiation. Each one of them was passed by the Palestine National Congress. And now, if there is going to be a permanent settlement negotiations, it's going to go to a plebiscite, to a referendum, where the Palestinians, and I repeat, inside and outside Palestine, will have the right to vote on them. And before they accept them, there will be absolutely no agreement with Israel.
Nabil Shath, many thanks indeed. Now, we want to point out that you can read these papers that we've been discussing here for yourself. The first release is up on the website right now, along with the papers that we're talking about tonight. They're being released as we speak about them. All you have to do is go to transparency.aljazeera.net, and once you're there, follow the instructions. This is an Al Jazeera Network special, opening the door to the real world of Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. We're going to hear from the Americans too, but who do you think the Palestinians favor out of these presidents, past and present? The answer may well surprise you. And we'll be bringing you global reaction to the release of the Palestine Papers, some of it, not surprisingly, not very positive. Hello again, this is an Al Jazeera Network special on the Palestine Papers. And here's a quick reminder of what the Palestine Papers actually are. They are the largest leak of confidential files in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a cache of documents from a decade of negotiations between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority, along with the United States. Now, there are 1,676 documents in total, minutes, meetings, internal emails, reports, studies, notes, maps and draft agreements. They're an unprecedented window into Israeli-Palestinian Authority, US, European and Arab relations, and they reveal a wealth of information about how the parties negotiate behind closed doors. Now, Jerusalem's holy city and its settlements were the focus of the first release of the Palestine Papers on Sunday. In case you missed it, here's a quick recap. We revealed the chief Palestinian Authority negotiator offered to, quote, be creative in talks over Islam's third holiest site. Saeb Erekat told the US that the Haram al-Sharif, or Temple Mount, could be separated from an initial peace deal. And negotiators also offered Israel the biggest Jerusalem ever, annexing every settlement in East Jerusalem bar one. But even then, Israel and the US refused, saying that it wasn't enough. And since Al Jazeera released the Palestinian Papers on Sunday, there's been a flurry of reaction. Emotions, as you'd expect, are running high. Well, this was a scene at Al Jazeera's office in the West Bank city of Ramallah early on Monday. Protesters tried to break down the door. They were later dispersed. The chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat has spoken in Cairo alongside the Arab League Secretary General. He says that his office will be looking into how the documents were leaked and that even he will be subject to the investigation.
We have nothing to hide, but we urge everyone to fully realise that we have deposited the documents related to the issues such as Jerusalem, borders, the refugees, water and the prisoners of Mr. Amir Musa. We have always consulted with him and with his legal teams. We have deposited all our documents with all our Arab brothers. Regarding what happened yesterday, I did not study the documents yet. The documents were linked to my office. We will have an investigation to what happened and I will be subject to the force of law. Regarding the content, I noticed the selectivity and mixing up of issues.
Well, senior Palestinian official Yasser Abed Rabbo has given perhaps the fullest response today, speaking for nearly an hour on the Palestine Papers. Al Jazeera specialist Clayton Swisher listened to what he had to say.
The Palestinian Authority has been quick to dismiss the Palestine Papers as, quote, mindless sensationalism. Now, just hours after we broke the news, senior PLO official Yasser Abed Rabbo had this to say.
I'm asking researchers to immediately form a committee to study these documents and to verify their authenticity or not, and to study the extent to which Al Jazeera has taken certain sentences out of context and quotes which were said sometimes in an ironic way.
Now, the PA's main allegation is that Al Jazeera took the quotes from the papers and presented them out of context. You can check it for yourself and see if it's true by going to transparency.aljazeera.net. The full documents are online, and maybe the fact that the Palestine Papers are on the internet explains why Abed Rabbo made this reference to the WikiLeaks website.
The Al Jazeera leadership tried to buy the WikiLeaks site, and as you know, as they say, money in Qatar is unlimited. They wanted to have a monopoly on the WikiLeaks site, and they paid an extortionate price for that. But the owners of WikiLeaks didn't want to give the monopoly to Al Jazeera to publish documents, so the deal collapsed. And that is why Al Jazeera has now begun to compete with WikiLeaks.
Now, Abed Rabbo also complained that the Palestinian Authority was not able to see the documents before we went to air.
They never sent anybody to say to us there are documents, there are facts or half-facts, there are papers, there are maps. Do you have answers regarding this? We are going to make these papers public and let them make it public, but we would also like your response and your feedback. Media professionalism and political honor would have required that.
We'd like to remind all members of the Palestinian Authority that they're welcome on Al Jazeera anytime to respond to the Palestine Papers. We do hope they'll show.
Well, as of 2000 hours GMT on Monday, the time we went live, the Israeli government has made no response, but a statement has come through from former Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, who featured quite a lot in the Palestine Papers. In a statement reported by local media, her office said, quote, Livni will continue to observe the discreetness of the negotiating process toward the possibility of renewing it and bringing the conflict to a conclusion, while protecting Israel's national security interests, which Livni upheld throughout the negotiations. We've also been gauging Palestinian opinion on the streets today.
I came here in 1948 from West Jerusalem. I lived here since 48. I am 72 years old. It is impossible to me to move from here. The only place I can go from here is to my grave.
It's a good thing that people here know what's really going on, because everyone always blames each other for not achieving anything and for creating more problems. Now we know who is in the right and who is in the wrong.
Every day things go from bad to worse for us. There is no other way for a just solution apart from the resistance.
It hasn't revealed anything new. Al Jazeera has a specific reason, motive in its politics to target the Palestinian negotiators rather than support them.
All the rulers of the Arab world are getting a lesson of what happened in Tunisia. Now these things are being revealed. It will put a big question mark on the leadership, absolutely.
Well, remember that all of the documents we're revealing this week are appearing on a special website. Let's cross now to Greg Karlstrom at the web desk for more on this. Greg.
Adrian posted another batch of documents and also reporting and analysis about those documents. Massive numbers of people already going to our website to access these documents, to comment on social media sites. We've been trending on Twitter. A lot of people wondering what the long-term consequences will be of this release of the Palestine Papers. Some of the feedback we're getting, Michel Salaban on Facebook asks if it's time for a one-state solution. And then on Twitter, a comment from Hala Ab, who writes, "This is very depressing, especially since I'm a 1948 refugee." A reminder, of course, you can view all of the most recently viewed documents at transparency.aljazeera.net. And you can make your comments and read lots of reaction on Twitter using the hashtag Palestine Papers. We're at facebook.com/Al Jazeera. Adrian?
Now let's go to our final revelation on this particular program. The Palestine Papers cover crucial years of the peace process in the Middle East, but they also document the most recent efforts by President Obama to get a deal done. The papers reveal a new U.S. administration that was unwilling to accept what the Palestinians felt were hard-won gains made under the presidency of George W. Bush. Mike Hanna reports.
After a few months in office, the US President ushered before the cameras the Israeli and Palestinian leaders, meeting for the first time since Benjamin Netanyahu came to office. The Palestine Papers reveal this was no chance encounter on the sidelines of a UN gathering, but a carefully choreographed event planned the week before.
The outcome is that the president will emerge from the meeting with the two leaders, and he will make comments to the press. He will also announce the intention to meet in Egypt towards the end of October. He will say, a contiguous, viable, democratic state of Palestine living side by side. You know the formula with the Jewish state of Israel.
You said Jewish?
Yes.
Will he mention the core issues?
To compensate for less than 100% freeze, maybe he will mention the core issues.
The core issues, like borders, the Palestinian right of return, and the status of Jerusalem, have been largely set aside in the peace process to date. The primary Palestinian demand of the US to bring about an end to Israel's settlement building.
We cannot force a sovereign government. We can use persuasion and negotiations and shared interests.
Of course you could, if you wanted. How do you think this will reflect on the credibility of the US if you can't get this done?
We make the call on our own credibility.
And while the Palestinians were urging a new policy of toughness from Obama towards Israel, they were also intent on clinging to the gains they perceived as making under the Bush administration, in particular an apparent undertaking by the then Secretary of State to use the 1967 line of disengagement as a point of reference in talks about borders.
Again, I tell you that President Obama does not accept prior decisions by Bush. Don't use this because it can hurt you. Countries are bound by agreements, not discussions or statements.
But this was an agreement with Secretary Rice.
And as the settlement building continued unabated, the Palestinian negotiators introduced a new threat: to abandon the long-held concept of a negotiated two-state solution and begin pressing for a single nation of two peoples. This a move that would render decades of negotiation meaningless and challenge fundamentally the concept of Israel as a Jewish state.
You've expressed your frustration over the last 19 years, but I tell you, there has never been a president on this issue like this one. You are denying him the opportunity to create the state that you want. By saying one state, you are telling him to get out. Even though you negotiated with every Israeli government before under different administrations.
Oh, we're beat. We're like a horse without rations who can't walk.
President Obama, said Mitchell, is intent on launching real negotiation in his first term, not at the end of the second, like presidents before.
Now, with the first president who wants to make an effort, he's being penalized by you.
Not me. He has Netanyahu. He came to Cairo and said full freeze. We will not convert to Judaism. So if the Netanyahu charade of two states is followed, it's going to be one state.
A few months ago, President Obama launched direct talks in a glare of publicity. They lasted a few short sessions before once again being suspended amidst ongoing Israeli settlement activity.
And Mike Hanna joins us now live from Jerusalem. Mike, so the Obama administration has effectively scrapped the roadmap. We heard in that reconstruction there George Mitchell saying that this guy is different of Obama. So what's the latest American plan to emerge from the wreckage of the old one?
Well, being made very clear in the Palestine papers that we just reported there is the insistence of the Obama administration that it will not accept any of the agreements, understandings, or discussions held under the Bush administration. George Mitchell making very clear that basically they want to start anew. The term there is used is relaunch negotiations rather than restart negotiations. In other words, they are looking at wiping the table clear and basically beginning again. Now, what has emerged as well in recent weeks in the light of all of this is an increasing U.S. insistence that core issues will be addressed. We heard in that particular report that core issues would be mentioned at that meeting in New York, the first meeting between Netanyahu and the Palestinian Prime Minister. Core issues would be mentioned if Israel had not granted a 100% settlement freeze at that particular time. In other words, the Obama administration, very early on, was using questions like core issues as a bartering chip to try and persuade the Israelis to introduce the settlement freeze. We saw there the amount of time spent about discussing a settlement freeze, which clearly the Obama administration began to think got in the way of getting to proper negotiation, but at the same time not beginning to discuss the core issues or indeed forcing Israel to do so.
All right, mate, many thanks indeed. Let's get some reaction now from the United States. Patty Culhane joins us live from Washington, D.C. Patty.
Well, I want to tell you the official U.S. reaction seems to be to try and cast doubt on these documents. Interestingly, they're using about the same language here at the White House and also at the State Department, saying in essence that these are purported documents from another entity and that we can't speak to their veracity. Still, that led to a very interesting exchange at the State Department between spokesman P.J. Crowley and a reporter.
We don't deny that this release will, at least for a time, make the situation more difficult than it already was.
If these things have just been created out of whole cloth and are lies and misrepresentations, as some Palestinian officials are saying, why should it make anything more difficult?
This, the pursuit of peace in the Middle East is at one level a substantive challenge. Obviously, we're evaluating the political reaction to what has come forward in the last 24 hours and what is likely to come forward in the coming days.
Patty, it's possibly pretty hard to gauge, but tonight we've focused a lot upon what could be described as the failings of the Obama administration in the peace process recently. What do you think the reaction is going to be from there to what we're revealing today in the Palestine Papers?
Well, I think the biggest question is if there looked like there was some sort of deal on the table, why the Obama administration would insist on going back and starting from scratch, especially considering that this is a president who said, and we just reported that very early on in his term, he was going to make this a priority. Remember, in his speech to Cairo, he said that this was going to be a key of his foreign policy focus, and we have seen it slowly disintegrate. I mean, it was just in September the president came out and said, we're going to do this, and then within a matter of weeks, it all fell apart over the issue of settlements. Even though the Obama administration, they've criticized quite a bit for making settlements a priority, they came out recently and said, okay, we're going to drop that as a precondition for talks and basically go back to shuttle diplomacy without calling it shuttle diplomacy. There's a real question as to whether or not this administration is going to even try to make it a priority in the coming 2 years as they really look to change their focus to getting reelected in 2012, focusing mostly on domestic issues.
All right, Patty, many thanks indeed. Well, let's bring in now Robert Grenier. He's a former director of the CIA Counterterrorism Center. He joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us. Let's go back a couple of years. Obama came to power and instilled in people, you remember, such high hopes. Here was the president that, as we heard George Mitchell in our reconstruction saying a few moments ago, that was different. This was the guy that was going to tackle and solve the issue of peace in the Middle East. And yet the papers show that he effectively swept away the roadmap and the progress made by the Bush administration and took the process back, well, you could argue, as far as the Clinton years. How does the Obama administration see that as progress? Why have they done that?
Well, fundamentally, we can really only speculate. Yes, I think it's absolutely true that President Obama, in his public pronouncements, attempted to demonstrate that this was a new sort of president and that he was going to go at this with a very new sort of attitude and with a great deal more empathy for the Arab and Muslim world and specifically for the Palestinians. And that was very much reflected in the speech that he delivered in Cairo in June of 2009. What I think has happened is that his administration has bumped up against the hard reality, the hard political reality, both in the United States and particularly in Israel. And as a result, therefore, I think that they have had to trim their sails markedly. And I think that's what is reflected in these formulations that we have seen from George Mitchell.
You've read through all the documents. I know you've taken some time to do so. They've inspired you, I understand, to pen an open letter, one that you think President Obama should possibly be writing to the people of the Middle East. Do you want to read it to us?
Well, I think that President Obama is quite sincere in terms of his sentiments. As I said before, he has bumped up against some hard political reality. And my fantasy, if you will, is that if he were to study carefully a select group of documents drawn from the Palestine Papers, there are certain conclusions that he would be forced to reach. I don't think as a matter of policy he would be able to honestly relate what he would hold in his heart as a result. But let's just take it up as to where he would start. I think, first of all, he would have to conclude that in order to achieve peace, and in fact, in order to pursue U.S. interests in the region, ironically, our interests would be better served by having someone else attempt to do what we ourselves have manifestly been incapable of doing, and that is playing the role of an honest broker. That's number one. Number two, I think he would have to conclude that the time for a two-state solution has passed. And let's pick up there. The facts on the ground are undeniable and beyond our political capacity to change, and beyond your political capacity to change. And although recent revelations have shown the Palestinian leadership willing to accept Israeli settlers into their own state, the presence of such a large number of Jews, whom you would justly and understandably feel constrained to protect, renders the concept of two states for two peoples substantially moot. Moreover, I must tell you again as a friend that there lurks in these formulations, in the linking of citizenship and race, and in the insistence of some on gaining recognition of Israel as a Jewish state, a grave danger. Not a physical one, but a moral one. The strength of Israel and its legitimacy in the community of nations rests not on its military might, but on the humane and democratic values which it has always espoused, even if, where some are concerned, those values are observed in the breach.
Right, many thanks indeed. Listen, if you want to read that letter in full, then just go to our website, transparency.aljazeera.net. And let's return to our panel now. With us in the studio tonight, Rami Khouri and Ali Abu Nima. Some closing thoughts from both of you, gentlemen. I know you, Ali, in particular, are highly critical of the Obama administration's handling of negotiations, aren't you?
I think the bombshell in the papers tonight is the Obama administration's refusal to recognize the 1967 line as the basis for the two-state solution. Its refusal even to stand by the positions of the Bush administration. And what this means, in my view, is it opens the door to the sorts of population exchanges that Tzipi Livni and Avigdor Lieberman are talking about. And by coincidence, just this week, the Washington Institute of Near East Policy, a very influential Israel lobby think tank, formerly headed by Obama advisor Dennis Ross, published a series of maps this week proposing exactly that kind of population exchange. And as we know, it's only a short step from the Washington Institute to the White House.
Rami, I need a very quick answer from you. We've got 30 seconds or so. It's frustrating for the Palestinians, though, having to give up on all these gains they've made every time there's a new administration, both US and Israeli.
It's very frustrating, and the Palestinian people are searching for alternatives, peaceful resistance. Some people talk of armed resistance. Some people talk of going to the UN. It's clear that the United States cannot be trusted anymore as an impartial or effective mediator, and it responds to the balance of power.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. You've been watching day 2 of an Al Jazeera network special. Now, on day 3, prepared to kill their own.
I'm Mike Hanna in Gaza, and documents just made public reveal the extent to which the Palestinian Authority colluded with Israel in action against those who live here.
Plus, revelations on rendition, the secret plot by British intelligence to abduct and hold Palestinians to help the Middle East peace process. We hope to see you again tomorrow. Remember, you can read it all for yourself. Just go to transparency.aljazeera.net and follow the instructions. We're back with the next release of the Palestine Papers at 20 hours GMT on Tuesday. I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Al Jazeera.